today, talk about a business model canvas. Let me tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from on this. I am a political scientist. I started a company called H2O Score about 18 months ago. It solves the problem of water conservation for communities. And I don't want to get into too much of that right now. A couple of interesting points, though. So we've got equity valuation now in the millions of dollars. That doesn't really mean anything. It's like monopoly money. It's, but there's a sense in 18 months that we've come really far, and we've got big contracts we're negotiating with governments and with companies. So we've come a really long way in a really short amount of time. There are two lessons that I want to draw from that are pertinent to this. One is that I know nothing about business. I've been in academia. I worked in the mall when I was in college. That's about the sum total of my business experience. I've never taken a class in the business school. I don't have an MBA. I taught interest groups and lobbying. Secondly, this is what's called social entrepreneurship. This idea that we're going to use business models, business practices, business organizational structures. We're a for-profit entity to solve a huge social problem. The problem of water sustainability is one of the most important and existential challenges that we face as a society in the 21st century. Right? It's like Mother Teresa, water sustainability. I mean, it's like right there with the kind of mission of Marquette, this idea of social responsibility. We want to do this through business models. It does not mean that you can't make money. Doing social entrepreneurship does not preclude profit. It means that you use profit models to solve big social problems in a way that couldn't be solved with traditional models. And so when we talk about entrepreneurship, when we talk about business models, it doesn't mean that you have to be a business person or that you can't make money, or that you have to make money, that you can't also solve a big social problem at the same time. These are all part of the same formula, and I don't want to make any strong distinctions. We can make minor distinctions between these different models, but essentially the core is the same. So a business model canvas, where does this come from, this idea? There's a book written by a guy named Alex Osterwalder, and he has a co-author named Yves French. And this was published in 2010, so this is really new stuff we're talking about here. And in this is a great book. It's full of pictures and non-traditional text arrangements. It's not like a regular textbook, and you read it, and the sort of key piece of this is that you can think about business in a visual model, right? As a structure of a business is not encapsulated in a long written document, but rather in a model that you can put on a screen. This is sort of a revolutionary idea that's gotten a lot of people thinking, and a lot of people thinking about doing businesses differently, and especially starting businesses differently. So those of you who are entrepreneurs recognize this picture. This is what it looks like when you're starting a business. There's some big path. It looks slightly creepy. Twists and turns a lot. There may be a side path going that way. Oftentimes, actually, this isn't very realistic, because if this was true to what an entrepreneur faces, it would be dark out. You really don't know. You've got an idea, and you know where you want to go, right? You know where this path leads, right? Every entrepreneur knows that at the end of the day, that's where they're going to end up. But how you get there is the million-dollar question, or if you're Facebook or Instagram, it's the billion-dollar question. And so how do we get from that dark path to that rainbow? So forever, the answer, and this happened to me. I had this idea for a water conservation startup, and went to ask people what I should do, and they said, you need a business plan. Better yet, enter the business plan contest, and that will steer you in the right direction. Okay. So there's an important data point here. So when you go write a business plan, what is that? When you're here, right? You're not yet there. You're here, and you write a business plan. What are you writing? You're writing about something that you don't know anything about, right? Now, okay, if you start a coffee shop, you kind of have a better fit. You need coffee, you need customers, you need rent. The variables are sort of there already, and you can kind of assemble them into a plan. If you're solving the problem of water conservation, what does your business plan look like? So they say, write a business plan. And I went and I did this. We did the business plan competition, and they were like, this is dumb. And I'm like, I know. I'm just making, I got the numbers. They got, we're going to make $1 million someday, right? And I got it all in the plan. And there's a data point here, which is that I don't even know if 95, it's probably like 99% or something of startups fail. They all fail. It's like the dumbest thing ever to invest time and energy into as a startup, because you're going to fail. You're better off playing the lottery on a consistent basis. Head down to Potawatomi and try your luck down there, because most of these startups fail. The question that we ask as business practitioners, right, as academics and as scholars of this, is why? Why is it that so many startups fail? Is it because they're out there pressing the envelope, right? They're doing new and innovative things, and so there's going to be a sort of a built-in failure rate to that? Is it because they're slackers? Is it because they sort of live in their parents' basement and fiddle around on computers all day and emerge with some idea, and like some of the time they're crazy and some of the time they're brilliant? Why is it that startups fail so much? Part of the reason is that when they're looking at this, and I'm pointing to my screen, it's probably better if I point to your screen. When they're looking at this path, so you write a plan. The plan is, I'm going to follow the path as fast as I can. That's what most startups do. They know they need to work quickly and optimize their speed advantages. So you run faster and faster down the path. And you miss that kind of critical turning off point because you're so bent on following your plan, you don't see the opportunities that emerge. Kind of the worst case scenario actually is you write a business plan and you follow it. Because it's fiction, right? So it's 95% of the time, the fiction that you write is not going to actually reflect the reality. No business plan survives first contact with actual customers. It's never happened before. Google wasn't designed to be Google, right? The most successful businesses were never designed to be that which they became. And if you're lucky, you can switch what you're doing in time to meet the customer demand before you run out of money. But typically, it results in failure. So the people who research this have come up with this kind of distinction between a startup and a regular business. So a regular business is focused on execution. Right? You have certain products that need to be developed. You have a pretty defined customer base. You know more or less what the variables are that you're going to encounter with your business, and you execute on a plan. This is where a plan is actually really helpful. If you're running Marquette, we've got a strategic plan. This is going to be, you can't run a university without planning. You can't run Rockwell Automation or Miller Brewery without planning. A startup, though, is a different kind of business. It's a different kind of organizational structure that it shouldn't be optimized for execution. It should be optimized for search. That is, a startup is a search for a durable, replicable, sustainable business model. And this is kind of a big epiphany for people who are studying and doing startups, is to think about that as an organizational type in and of itself, different than a traditional business. So a traditional business executes, a startup searches. And this is what they search for. This is Osterwalder's business model canvas. And it identifies all of the kind of key pieces of what constitutes a business plan. But rather than writing a dense, long, fictional document, as a startup, you just want to hit all of these different boxes. Now, when I first looked at this, I was a little confused, because it asked me things like key resources, key partners, cost structure, channels, that I just had no idea, like for my business, what those meant. What that, Cost structure? I don't know, 0. We're just doing it in our spare time. Some rack space hosting. Key resources, I don't know. Key activities, yeah, we're going to make a website for people. It seemed like weird that they would expect me to know what was on this business model canvas. So I went back and started reading this literature a little bit more, and the difference is that the business model canvas is actually designed to optimize your search. So it's a tool. It's a tool to help you search for your scalable, replicable business model. And you're not expected to know what's in the canvas, but rather to hypothesize the key pieces of your canvas. And if you set them up, if you start out by saying, I don't know the answer, so the complete opposite of a business plan where you have to pretend like you know the answer, the complete opposite of that is saying, I don't know what my cost structure is going to be, but I have a hypothesis about it, and I'm going to put it in my canvas, and then I'm going to test that hypothesis. And then I'm going to validate that with actual customers and hiring people as we grow and as we have a product out there, so that by the end of the day I can say, yes, this is what my cost structure is. So in that sense, now the canvas becomes actually a pretty useful document for a startup. So you put in your hypothesis about your value proposition, your customer segment, your customer relations channels, and you figure out which of these do I need to know first? Or which hypothesis is the most critical one for me to test, without which it makes no sense for me to continue going forward with my business. It probably is not going to be your key resources. It's probably going to be either your value proposition, your customer segment, or your revenue streams, or likely some combination of those 3 things. What is it? What problem are you trying to solve? Whose problem are you trying to solve? And how are they going to pay for it? Without those, the rest of the stuff is kind of useless. It's useful to put hypotheses in there, but you can start testing based on the most critical assumptions about your business. So this is what we started doing with H2O scores. What is the value? So this idea of, okay, we're trying to solve the problem of water conservation. What's the value proposition here? It's a public good, right? Water is there for all of us to enjoy, but none of us really own it per se. So I'm not going to sell you water. Bottled water, maybe that's kind of weird. There's already some pretty big businesses in the bottled water industry. Plus, that's not really conservation. So what is the value that we're providing to our potential customers? Then, who are our customers? Is it you, the public, that's our customer, or is there some other market segment that may be willing to pay for us solving the problem of water conservation? Maybe it's the water utilities that have a finite supply of water that they have to distribute to their populations, that then they'll pay us to help their customers conserve so they have more water to give out to more and more customers. Some cities actually have growth limitations where they're not allowed to build any new houses until they've achieved conservation measures. Other cities, just across the little hill on Interstate 94 out there is Waukesha. Anybody here from Waukesha? Your wells are poisonous. There's radium in them. You're going to die if you continue drinking that water. So they need to get water from Lake Michigan in order to continue to grow their community. In order to get that water, they have to cut down the amount of water they currently use, and they've struggled to do so. So maybe it's the water utility. So then you have a hypothesis, right? My hypothesis is that people will pay me for water conservation. Wrong. Okay, so we went out and tried to sell that idea to a bunch of people. They said, we're not paying you money for this. So then we can go to a water utility and say, will you pay us to conserve water? And they start saying, yeah, this is like a huge problem for us. We'd love to, if somebody could figure out how to get people actually to conserve, it'd be really valuable for us. So then we say, okay, well, how much? Right, you find a customer segment, and then we have hypotheses about how much they're willing to pay. What do they currently pay for? Right now they pay to give toilets or toilet rebates out to their customers for high efficiency toilets. Right, so you can save, a couple 100 gallons of water a year with high efficiency toilets in a residential household. They pay a lot for those. It's pretty low return. So we have to be able to beat their current solution to the problem by a factor that makes them willing to take the risk of working with a software-based startup that doesn't have a real track record of success. But it's okay if we don't know this. We have hypotheses that we're testing about this, and we're always actively testing those hypotheses and refining them. So then we discovered that Wauwatosa doesn't have a water shortage problem. Milwaukee doesn't have a water shortage problem. So I go to the city of Milwaukee and I say, I want you to pay me to solve your water conservation problem for you. And they say, we hate you. We're at 30% capacity right now. All of our industries have left. We're losing money hand over fist, and you want to cut back on our only revenue source? Forget about it. So then we can, okay, that's good to know, right? So that's not bad on our part. We just learned something. We just learned that that's not the right customer segment for us. We need cities who have water scarcity problems to be the ones that will end up paying us money, or the ones that may not have a water scarcity problem. They have a community that is committed to environmental principles. So city of Madison, right? As a city, they want to cut back their water use by 20%. They have a technologically savvy, liberal community. The kind of what we're offering them, even though it doesn't solve they don't really have a water conservation problem per se. A little bit, but it's not pressing. They have a community commitment to this that makes it a nice, what we call product market fit. So this is what we do with the business model, is that we systematically test hypotheses within each of these different boxes. And as a startup, then you're empowered to go out and to search. Right? So you don't have to know all the answers. You can come to a startup weekend, bring a business model canvas with you, come up with an idea, and put a bunch of hypotheses, and then do like a MailChimp survey of like all your friends, or do a Facebook survey of all your friends, get immediate feedback on your idea, plug that into some of your boxes there, and at the end of the weekend you're like, I have a business idea and I already have evidence that it's going to work based on these key boxes. Or you can even put a sign-up page, right? Sign up and put a deposit down on being able to get this product first. We have never made it. It's just an idea, but people do that. Right? People say, yeah, I want this first, and I'm willing to pay $5 to be on the list of the first recipients of this product. All of a sudden you have a value proposition, you have a customer segment, you have a revenue stream. You're halfway to your startup goals in a couple of days. Right? It's not, you don't have to spend 3 years in your parents' basement writing code to emerge victorious 3 years later and saying, I've invented a search algorithm. And meanwhile, there's Google already. So you just do this right away, get it out there and get feedback on it, and you start learning. And then you find the rainbow. All right, so that's the business model canvas. It's not complicated, but I want to reserve the remainder of the time for Q&A and to hear what you guys think about this, answer any questions you might have, and engage in a conversation about the process. Yes?
This might be a little off topic, but I just have a question for you. Of course, I know you, McGee. I've never asked you this. Why does a political scientist care about water scarcity and water conservation? Like, what was that pivotal moment when the light bulb went on that went, I care about this?
There's two really good answers to that. The first is that it has nothing to do with being a political scientist. It has to do with being a human. So we're all going to die. And a lot of us are going to die a lot sooner and under a lot more difficult conditions if we don't solve the problem of water scarcity. And communities around the country are going to suffer because of that. And we have an obligation as humans that fits with our market, commitments as well, to go out and try to be the difference to solve that problem. As a political scientist, what's exciting to me is being able to use my training to solve this problem. So all my life I've been doing research, right? Writing term papers, the very kind of hypothesis testing that is essential for starting a company. So in fact, if you're in business and you want to be an entrepreneur, no offense, I think that's the wrong field for you to be in. You need to be in social sciences or natural sciences or engineering, where you're used to creating hypotheses, testing those hypotheses in systematic ways, and applying them to real-world problems. That's what entrepreneurship is. So as social scientists, we're actually better trained for entrepreneurship than people in business schools that are taught how to run businesses, right? But that's a completely different skill set and a completely different process than the process of entrepreneurship itself. So the great thing about a startup weekend then is that we can have engineers come down with business, and the business students can say, your financial projections don't make any sense. Here's how you would do a basic accounting, kind of process for this. But a comm student can come in and say, all right, let's think about this from our own perspective. And then a social scientist can come in and say, here's how we create some hypothesis tests. So this is what is exciting to me as a political scientist about the process of entrepreneurship in general. Other questions or thoughts?
I was just going to say, so you had like the search and execute side that you showed there, and you said like the search was more kind of dynamic. You're in the startup, you keep changing it. And then some things that are maybe more established are more of the execute, like you've given the example of like planning with like Marquette University. When would you start shifting and like have more solid plans versus something more changing? Would you say like you would see a shift, like if you had your business, when you would reach a certain point and say, okay, now we can be in more solid plan mode? Yeah,
there's actually kind of a critical point, and it's somewhat captured by this idea of product market fit. So, but essentially, you have a product that people are willing to pay for, and now you've got to get a whole bunch of people to pay for that. And you understand how you're going to create more of that product, how you're going to get it to the people who you want to buy it, how you're going to get resupplied with the raw materials that you need to create that product. When you've got all that stuff figured out, then you go into execute mode. Then you write a plan for how you're going to, essentially it's called scale your startup. And oftentimes that's when you would take a big investment from like a venture capital company, when you can go to them and say, if you give me this $1 million or this $5 million, I'll grow this company into a $100 million company, and here's how.
I'm trying to figure out a question, but maybe just a thought. I had my vision in March of this year, and since then I've been trying to start a small business. And the message that I got from my loved ones was, don't go overboard, don't spend a ton of money, start small, start small, start small. Don't, the pressure, that your comment just scared me a little, the pressure of someone giving me $1 million, expecting me to perform on that $1 million is a lot different than the pressure I put on myself at 5,000. And starting small and building gradually, and scaling up. So I think there's two different models going on there with, big investment. And, I did the business plan, and, it sits on my shelf because I don't really need to borrow any money.
Right.
That's the point of the business plan. You give it to a banker or an investor. So now I'm at the point where, okay, I kind of have the product going. I've got the, setting up the little website. Now, how do you get things moving? Sort of a thing. And that's why I'm here today.
Yeah.
I think, first of all, to network and say, I need some engineering help. I need some technical website help. And, I need a team. That's why I liked your introduction. A team of people to really make it work and bring some expertise to add to what I bring. I guess that's why I'm here today.
It's a fantastic comment, and you're doing everything right. So the worst thing you could do right now would be to take $1 million, because you wouldn't know what to do with it. It would be the end of your company, because you just spend it all and then for no particular purpose. What's great about this, the reason that I keep coming back to this model personally with what I'm doing, is that it allows me to so we should think about this model as three-dimensional. And there's a date up here. It's kind of hard to see. And it's useful if you're starting a company to at least once a week go back and revisit everything on here. When we run our boot camps for startups, we actually require that. Every week we spend a week focusing on one of these dimensions. But you'll start with the value proposition that you think is like, here's the value that I think my business is going to provide. And as you start researching your customer segments, your revenue streams, your channels of distribution, your cost structure, you get feedback from people that say, I love what you're doing, but if you did it this way, this would really solve my problem. And then you go back to your value proposition and say, okay, what I'm providing here is actually slightly different than what I initially thought I was providing. A three-dimensional, in that sense, business model canvas allows you to see how your idea evolves, but also forces you to go back and say, okay, here are these pieces that I've got, but I just don't know how I'm going to create partnerships that allow me to grow my business. So what are some hypotheses that I have about how I'm going to create partnerships? And how can I test those hypotheses to see if I'm right about that? And in the process of testing, what we've discovered is that you actually create partnerships in the process. You don't go asking someone, hey, would you like to be my partner? You just go and say, hey, we have this hypothesis that if we work with, one of our big ones that we stumbled upon completely by accident was that big companies have huge sustainability budgets. Like Miller Coors spends hundreds of millions of dollars on sustainability. You have to walk a pretty long way in Milwaukee to find out about those sustainability efforts. All of that money that they put into, and this is marketing, it's PR, it's publicly visible. There's not a lot of internal return for that. Gets lost. They can't advertise about it. It's not part of like Miller Lite, and so they said, if you could connect us to people who care about this in a way that allows us to kind of target our message, then that would be extremely valuable to us. So then we were like, oh, so these guys are kind of a partner, but at the same time, they're kind of a customer segment now for us. That not only are we solving the problem of water conservation, we're doing so in a way that creates a platform for people and companies to kind of interact with each other. And you start to discover new things about your business that you may not have seen right away in the process of testing all those kind of key hypotheses. So I'd encourage you, and your situation sounds so much like everybody else who's we're all, there's no real book out there to tell us what do you do next, right? So this gives us a way to keep pushing forward and keep saying, what don't we know about our business yet that we can start to discover, and then use that information to grow our business further.
Thanks so far. My name is Todd.
Hi.
I'm glad to be here.
Thanks.
My question is, do you have some organizations as examples that use profit models to solve social problems? Other examples?
Yeah, absolutely. So the kind of global vision for this is the Grameen Bank in India, in which financial assets were pooled in a way that allowed the bank to lend to people in dire poverty. And they could use that money to start their own small-scale businesses and then pay back the loans that could be reinvested into the community. It proved wildly successful in India, and that model has now been replicated all around the world. And in fact, Marquette is affiliated with an organization called Ashoka. It's a foundation that they have these social entrepreneurs all over the world. And if you go to the Ashoka website, it's sort of an astonishing, world that opens up into all these examples of people using for-profit business models to solve problems of poverty, of healthcare, of environmental degradation, and so on and so forth, both kind of in local, cities as well as globally around the world. You are not alone in your struggles. So especially starting if you're starting a coffee shop, you kind of know who your customers are, but if you're doing something that's a startup, and I think a startup is different than a regular business in the sense that it's oftentimes trying to identify a new niche or even a whole new market. Who exactly are we selling to, and what's the value proposition of what we're providing? There's kind of two answers to that. And the sort of most influential thought leader on this is a guy by the name of Steve Blank. And he wrote a really horrible, long, impossible to read book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And he recently released a new book, I think it's called the Startup Owner's Manual, that lays out this kind of idea of a process of customer discovery. So it's precisely the point that you raised there, that we don't know who our customers are. We don't know what the value proposition that we're offering to them are. And so how do you get the ball rolling? And this is his and so he's been teaching at Stanford for a number of years and has this sort of model now that has been established in a bunch of business schools around the country, and that we're doing now. I had a chance to go out to a seminar in the last month, September, with some of the startup people in Milwaukee we're trying to coordinate our teaching about entrepreneurship around this idea that we don't know who our customers are, so we need to go through this process of customer discovery in order to do that. The other kind of big concept is this idea of a minimum viable product. And there's an author by the name of Eric Ries, who's kind of famous. And you don't need to buy their books. Just go read their blogs for a while, and you get pretty much everything that's in their books. So it's a way, if you're like me, you don't want to spend $20-$30 on a book, go read the blogs. All the history is there. You can spend a weekend just reading the blogs, and essentially, now that John's left, I can say you can essentially get a business school education I'm being a little bit facetious, but there is a lot to learn from just reading what practitioners are doing with startups. So Eric Ries has this idea of a minimum viable product. You don't necessarily need to create the full final version of your product right away. You need to identify some key piece that allows value to be built and understood around that key piece. So like the Google search bar, right, is a box that you type words into, and then it does magic. And around that, Google has built, an empire, right? But it's that box that drives everything that Google does. And their first search engines were terrible, right? But they got better. They learned. They got feedback from their customers, and they learned how to make a better search engine and then how to add stuff on top of that to create a more robust product. David, your product is no more defined than Google's is or was, right? What is Google? It's information. What's the market? Who's going to buy that? What are the conditions that they buy it? Who knows? If you're going to write a business model canvas for Google circa 1996 or something, you would be like, I don't even get what they would do, until you throw it out there and people start using it and they go, yeah, I really like what you're doing here. I see something in this that makes my life, solves a problem for me. And then you say, okay, how do other people have that same need? And then can I build a product around addressing those common needs? Does that help a little bit? Yeah, all right. These are great. Other thoughts, questions, comments, feedback? Yes, I know, I can see it.
I don't know, I just came to learn and see if I could hear anything more about H2O Scope.
Oh, yeah.
I got a meeting with the Hilton, so I'll be talking.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
These guys are in a class that's doing research on how are we going to market water conservation to people. So it's
Really hard.
Yeah, it's a hard challenge, right? It's a search. And they keep going, what do you want out of us? And I say, I don't know. I don't know the answers. This is the search. I have a very hard time with that, but good.
I have a question about the clarifying value proposition. We both happen to work for a company that has a particular value proposition that's rather, I want to say existential, rather it's a bit intangible. So right now we're looking at narrowing it into what matters. And I'm finding that when that happens, one group, we start talking this way, okay, here, this is what we're doing, and then you go to this group. It's very hard to have this unified theory of values in that way. So I'm wondering if you could just talk about, do most companies try to go to a unified theory, or are they comfortable having very disparate lines of business that don't have unified?
The yes is the answer. But so there's kind of two schools of thought on this in the startup and the people who write about this kind of thing. There's one school that says do one thing and do it really well. Figure out that one thing that you do, that one value proposition that you generate the most revenue from, that you feel most passionate about, and do that really well. Others who do these business model canvases will oftentimes do color-coded. So the practice here is to like put sticky notes up here and kind of like have a brainstorming exercise. But they sort of have color-coded customer segments that correspond to value propositions that are unique to that customer segment. And then different channels of distribution maybe for one customer segment versus the other. And so you've kind of segmented who your customers are with your business. And especially if you have a kind of a multi-sided business model where you have maybe different users than you have people who pay for it, then you do have a different value proposition for one group versus another group. And it may not be so simple as like, I made Angry Birds and I know what the value proposition is, and it's pretty much the same for everybody who's using it. The kind of rule of thumb here is to decomplexify it as much as possible. The more you can boil it down into a particular value proposition, generally the better you're better off. And what I found just in my own personal experience is that when I have a bunch of different like value propositions, different customers, it just means I haven't spent enough time working through these hypotheses and figuring out exactly what I'm trying to do. It's an indication that I've got work to do rather than sort of a stopping point, if that makes sense.
Is this template available to download on the Business Model Generation website?
It is. Yeah, you can download a big, huge poster of it and get it.
I was going to say, is it pretty good quality? So if I print
Yep.
it, okay.
Yep, totally.
They also have a really, if you're an iPad user, they have an app that's kind of costly. I think it's like $21, but it's really cool. I mean, you can do the stickies. I mean, I invested in it, and I think it's worth it if you really, and you can do multiple.
I'm still tangible. I gotta.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anyone that is kind of likes the iPad route, they do have a nice app that goes along with it.
Time for one or two more questions before folks got to. If you have to scoot off to class or whatever, that's fine. It won't be disruptive.
I have one thing.
Yeah.
I could have sworn, I could be wrong though, the last time I read about the Grameen Bank, wasn't it in some bad light, something with the founder and the profit was really high or something? I could be wrong.
Yeah, they made too much money.
Yeah.
Yeah, we get credit. People who do social entrepreneurship get criticized for that because everybody thinks because you're doing something good for the world that it should be free. And I think if you're providing value, then, and solving a problem at the same time, go spend your time criticizing Chevron, right? Because they're actually bad, right? Rather than I'm not as virtuous or altruistic as I could be. That seems shallow to me.
Yeah. So your model, you didn't adjust anything because you still think it's good.
Yeah. If we solve the problem of water conservation in this country and I get richer than Mark Zuckerberg doing it, I don't see a problem with that. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but if that's the implication, and water is now available for whatever reason for the next generations to enjoy, I think there shouldn't be kind of a trade-off necessarily there. And another related point is that you can also use this even if you're doing a nonprofit. Your customer segments are the foundations that you're trying to get grants from, or the government, or whoever it is that's paying you your money, your revenues coming. So then what it does is it kind of lays bare the hypocrisy of most nonprofits, that they're actually sort of middle-class welfare organizations that provide jobs for grant writers, and they don't solve social problems, they manage social problems, because if you solve them, then your grant writing job goes away. So the reason that we do social entrepreneurship as a business model is that the whole point of the business is to solve the problem rather than to become really good managers of the problem. And I think there's a kind of an important distinction to be made between the two. All right, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your time and attention. And again, follow up with me as you need to also.